Hello. Thank you all for coming to our Santa Clara River Watershed Committee. We are going to do some brief introductions in person. And so if you're in person, you can feel free to unmute yourself, do a brief introduction, and then over Zoom, if you can just write your name in the chat and your affiliation, that would be really helpful. And okay, I'm Lauren and I'm from Ventura County Resource Conservation District.
Morning, everybody. Jody Schweitzer, Water Program Director with the Farm Bureau of Ventura County.
Lisa Tate, grower in Santa Paula area.
Steve Cole, I'm Assistant General Manager with the Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency.
Jennifer Lancaster, I'm the Manager of Water Resources at Callegas.
Omar Castro, I'm the Operations and Maintenance Manager for Callegas.
Patrick O'Connell, hydrogeologist with United Water.
Bert Handy, citizen.
Morning, my name is Sarah Mulder. I'm Water Resources Manager with Ventura Water.
Rob Hampson, hydrologist at Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency.
Rachel Ray with Ventura County Resource Conservation District.
Heidi Ortloff, Ventura County Resource Conservation District. And over Zoom, we have representatives from the city of Oxnard, Supervisor Kelly Long's office, Ventura County Department of Agriculture, Weights and Measures, and University of California Cooperative Extension, Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, the Ventura River Watershed Resilience Pilot Project, McGrath Family Farm, Cal Trout, and the Southern Steelhead Coalition. And someone just joined from the city of Ventura.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Heidi. We have a pretty tight agenda today, so I would love to just do some quick updates if anybody has any. I think maybe someone on Zoom. Does anyone in person have anything general updates to give? Okay, great. Thank you. Anyone over Zoom?
Over Zoom, if you have an update to give, you can raise your hand. I know that Lynn Rodriguez, you had an update you wanted to share. You can unmute yourself and share your updates.
Thank you, Heidi and Lauren. Hi, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today. Just wanted to give a couple of quick updates regarding the Watershed Resilience Pilot Project in the Ventura River. Myself and Laura Schellenberger are serving as the co-project managers working with the RCD team on this grant. Just a $2 million 2-year grant project to examine and gather data on climate resilience information, related to vulnerabilities and risk assessment, water budgets, developing a network, and developing a watershed resilience plan that includes adaptation strategies and projects. So we will be coming to you with more in-depth updates in the near future, but I want just to give a couple of quick updates, because this project is focused on one watershed in the region, we want to make sure that the other 2 watersheds are kept apprised of what's happening and opportunities to learn from what we're doing in that watershed. Just wanted to share that we've created an official network for that project, which is the Ventura River Watershed Council that's been in existence for quite a long time. We've expanded that to include some additional entities to serve on the network that will be guiding this project until the end of February of next year. So we're about halfway through the grant cycle and just getting started on some of the real work of the project. We also have formed an advisory group of interested folks in the watershed to do more technical and in-depth review of the elements of the project as they go along. But we will be having some workshops and other opportunities for folks in the network and in the community to engage. As a reminder, this project is focusing on climate resilience and water, but also on underserved community engagement. So we have many aspects to the project. We have 2 consultants already on board. Rincon Consulting, which many of you probably know is a locally based consulting firm and has done a lot of work in the county and in the Ventura River watershed. They're under contract now with the RCD, and the RCD is the grantee. The other consulting effort is through the Cal State University program that actually also served as our consultants for the Prop 1 Disadvantaged Community and Tribal Involvement Grant. And folks from their Northridge campus and also the San Bernardino campus are working with us on this project. We had a kickoff meeting with Rincon yesterday and a kickoff meeting with Cal State today, later today. So we're getting going, and we'll have a lot more to report the next time. Maybe we'll do a more formal report at the next meeting. So we only have a year left. We do have a website for the project, and maybe Heidi could share that link in the chat. And then, we really want to make sure that folks some of you straddle multiple watersheds or you do work in the Ventura River watershed, so you're already engaged, but we definitely want to keep the door open for communication with the Santa Clara and the Cayugas watersheds. Another just last announcement I wanted to make is that the grant that I mentioned, the Disadvantaged Community and Tribal Involvement Grant, wrapped up a year or so ago, but there is a final report now available on the website Water Talks, which was the brand we used for the project. And that is a very comprehensive report identifying all the work that was done in our entire funding area, but also with the emphasis, on our region. A lot of great work was done over basically 8 years of that grant. And we'll be building on that work as we do outreach in the underserved community areas of the Ventura River. Happy to answer any questions, but I know today time is short, so I just wanted to give that brief update.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's great having you here. Yeah, in the interest of time, I would like to start with the first presentation from Robert Hampson on the 5-year groundwater sustainability plans. And if you have any other updates, we can spend time at the end of the meeting to have any, or you can send them to me and Heidi, and we can give them in the follow-up email afterwards. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rob Hampson. I'm a hydrologist for the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency. I'm going to be talking to you today mostly about our 5-year periodic evaluation of our GSPs, but just a little bit about groundwater sustainability in the areas that we manage. So just for orientation purposes, I just wanted to show a couple images of the watersheds in Ventura County. There's actually 4. A lot of people forget about Cuyama watershed, but they have some GSAs up there as well. So where Fox Canyon manages is mostly in Cayugas and Santa Clara. There's also some water wholesalers that roughly follow these boundaries. And really the point I wanted to make here, even though it's outside of Fox Canyon service area over in Simi Valley and Thousand Oaks, that area is served by Cayugas. And so that area is almost 100%, maybe 95% imported water. Then if you go over to Casitas, which is in green, that area is almost 100% local water supplies. I know they're trying to work on some interconnections. So we have everything from fully imported water dependencies to fully local water dependencies. And then of course the Santa Clara River, which is United's service area, has some imported water, but is a lot of locally derived supplies. This is just kind of for fun. We have a lot of local water servers here in Ventura County, a lot of really small ones, and it just kind of shows a lot of local ownership. A lot of these mutual water companies are operated by local folks. So just wanted to make that point, but we're really here to talk about groundwater. And so these are the groundwater basins in Ventura County that are subject to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. The red basins are the high priority basins. And so this square box there, Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, and Las Posas Valley, and then a slice of Arroyo Santa Rosa Valley are within the Fox Canyon's jurisdictional boundaries. So the red line is our jurisdictional boundary. This follows the Fox Canyon aquifer. So this is the first agency I've ever heard of where our jurisdictional boundary follows that of an aquifer. I don't know if you've ever heard of another agency that's boundary follows that, but so we don't really totally follow the DWR boundaries, which are the three basins that you see here. And so now's a good time just to pause and tell you that this presentation is really supposed to be palatable. It's not really like a hydrogeologist presentation. So I'm going to be speaking in broad generalities. There's caveats to almost everything I'm going to tell you today. I'm going to use some round numbers to make it a little more palatable. So we have these 5-year evaluations. I'll give you links to that so you can go kind of look for more technical information and more detailed numbers. But so most of these are for discussion purposes, although I think the numbers are still pretty good. Okay, so a little bit about Fox Canyon. We were created in 1982, kind of by United Water Conservation District and the County of Ventura. We're created to address seawater intrusion in the Oxnard Plain, which has been a very difficult issue to deal with. What our enabling legislation gives us is the ability to kind of manage groundwater through allocation systems. So we have various iterations of these allocation systems. They're kind of complicated to keep up with, but they've changed over time. And what you can see is these different ordinances that created those allocation systems helped reduce pumping. It helped start to reduce overdraft within the Oxnard, Las Posas, and Pleasant Valleys. So you can kind of see since we've been created, overall pumping has come down a little bit. And I'll talk a lot about data regarding this. This is us. We're really small. We have about 12 people, so it's not everyone. And some really great staff, and a lot of us are really new. So we've sort of had a lot of turnover, and so we're kind of turning a new leaf with a lot of new people, and I'm one of them. Okay, so we have our allocation systems, our enabling legislation. We're also the Las Posas Valley Water Master, so that basin adjudicated in 2023. And then we also have the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So each of these might sound like annoying administrative burdens to our pumpers in the basin. They are all fees. I mean, there's a $20 Sigma fee. There's a $62 Water Master fee for Las Posas users, and about a $60 fee per acre foot for the pumpers in the rest of the basin. So each of these are administrative fees, but they're also kind of tools in our toolbox that we can use to manage the basin. So I'm mostly here to talk about Sigma. Let me just get a sip of water. And with our Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, everyone has heard this so much, but just, for context, we're supposed to manage the basins to sustainability by 2040. There's 6 sustainability indicators. So this is kind of how we're assessing our progress to sustainability. Some call them the 6 Sigma sins. For our groundwater sustainability plans, we really focus on groundwater elevation as a proxy for all of these other items here. So that is to say, as long as we can maintain groundwater elevations above certain thresholds, we can kind of avoid all these other undesirable results. Okay, so what we're actually doing through quite complicated technical analysis, which I have spared you most of, but what we're doing is, this is a hydrograph, groundwater level in a well. And so what we're doing is we're setting these thresholds for a set of representative wells in specific aquifers to say that if we can maintain water levels above these minimum thresholds, we'll avoid those 6 undesirable results I just showed on the previous slide. And so most of the data that I'm going to present to you is out of this periodic evaluation. So 5 years ago, our groundwater sustainability plan was submitted to the Department of Water Resources. And so part of the Sigma legislation is at least every 5 years, you have to review and kind of check in on your progress towards sustainability. So most of the data in this presentation comes from those 5-year periodic evaluations. I did plagiarize a little bit from United as well, but you can look at those periodic evaluations for a whole lot of technical information. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the basins really quickly for context. They're largely interconnected. That's another one of those caveat items that I mentioned earlier, but a lot of connection between these 3 basins. One caveat would be this fault right here, which kind of separates East and West Las Posas, and varying levels of interconnection between Oxnard and Pleasant Valley. There's maybe 6 or so aquifer layers, depending on where you are, but we kind of like to bin it into an upper and lower aquifer system. Okay, so interconnected upper and lower aquifer system. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about Oxnard, but I sort of have to set the scene of seawater intrusion so you understand what we're up against here. So these are wells, these are representative monitoring points in the basin. So these are the locations that we've set those thresholds through our groundwater sustainability plan that I just mentioned. So these are kind of the monitor points that we use to assess our progress towards sustainability. And I want to talk about this area here. This area is called our saline intrusion management area. This area here is actually the reason why I took this job, but it's also a huge problem for us here. And so this is an image from some modeling from the 5-year evaluation, but the point that I'm wanting to show here is this is kind of the approximate saline intrusion front. So this is how far in the upper aquifer system that salt water has intruded into the plain. And then this is an image from a layer in the lower aquifer system. So they're not exactly the same, but you can see we have saline intrusion a couple miles into the Oxnard plain. It kind of varies by which layer you look at. And then through some of this evaluation modeling, it's hard to see, but these little green dots on that purple line are the start of the particle tracking model run. The red dots are the end of it. And so what we found through our modeling and part of this evaluation is that if we continue pumping at kind of current rates, that saline intrusion front is going to continue to progress into the Oxnard plain. Okay, here's some other images from United. So, you know, an Oxnard aquifer is in the upper system and Fox Canyon's in the lower, but kind of get an idea of sort of how far inland some of that saline intrusion is. So it's a very challenging problem to deal with. Okay, so again, this area, some more data from our periodic evaluation, changes in chloride concentrations over about a 10-year period. You can see a lot of red in the saline intrusion management area. So you can model this, you can measure it. We sample, well, United samples a lot of these wells, but you can look at empirical data, you can look at modeled data, and you can see that the chloride concentrations are increasing. So that's not what we want, especially if you're a hydrologist for a groundwater management agency created to deal with saline intrusion. Okay, so we're going to go through each kind of basin right now and kind of talk about the status of sustainability. And I want to show you a little bit of the water budget here. So for Oxnard, historically, about 160,000 acre feet of total water demand. In more contemporary times, about 120,000 acre feet per year. And you can notice, you know, blue is groundwater, orange is Santa Clara River, and then green is imported water. So a little bit of recycled water there and Conejo Creek diversions as well in modern times. So the point that I want to make here is, as you can see, you know, demand has decreased, but big chunks of Santa Clara River water is missing. I mean, 30,000 acre feet of less diversions. And I think part of that is, you know, management, things getting more efficient, these allocation systems. But I think a big part is really just critical drought where that maybe that water wasn't able to be diverted over that time. Okay, so let's look at some of these select wells and just get a sense of kind of where we are relative to our sustainability goals. These signatures on these hydrographs are so similar that I feel like we could just look at one. So this is a well over here in our saline intrusion management area. It's located where that star is. And I'm kind of dealing with this duality here when we're reporting results from this evaluation. Because on one hand, as you can see, you know, the past 10 years, these water levels were really critically low. Saline intrusion probably entering the basin at this time. And then in like the fourth, you know, quarter of this evaluation, like 2023, United did an excellent job. We had some wet years. United was prepared to perform a lot of recharge from Santa Clara River water. And so in like the fourth quarter of this evaluation, now we have water levels shoot up to a point that they're actually above a lot of these minimum thresholds that we've set all of a sudden. So on one hand, I'm kind of saying, hey, we're not in sustainability here. The saline intrusion front is continuing to progress. On the other hand, we're reporting that we're above a lot of these minimum thresholds now. So we're in a healthy situation right now. And it gives us some time to kind of manage into the future, I would say. But it's sort of easy to look at these thresholds and say, hey, everything's fine. We're above all these minimum thresholds, when really we're still having some of these undesirable results, at least throughout this 5-year periodic evaluation. Okay, so to summarize, probably more than 100,000 acre feet has entered the basin. This is a modeled flux that we found from our baseline modeling. By we, I mean United Water Conservation District actually performed the modeling. So a lot of saline intrusion has occurred over this 10-year period. some more over the 5-year evaluation period as well. We are estimating sustainable yield around 50,000 acre feet and, the total pumping around 70,000. So we're still pumping more than we think is sustainable, although we've had a couple of really wet years that have helped us recover. So just to go a little deeper than, just pumping too much, you kind of have to think about the structural configuration of these basins and just what the situation is here. And so the kind of natural hydrogeology of the basin lends itself such that the recharge over there from the Santa Clara River, also being diverted and recharged through superficial recharge basins by United, occurs up here in the northern end of the basin. And then, as I just mentioned, that saline intrusion is occurring on the south end. Additionally, these points on this graph here are water wells. So these are pumping. So we have recharge going in the northern part of the basin, a whole bunch of pumping, of course, occurring in the kind of middle of the basin, and then that saline intrusion occurring in the southern portion of the basin. So it's a difficult situation just based on the configuration here to solve this problem. So just going even a little deeper than that, let's look at some conditions in the forebay here. So this is the area that a lot of that recharge occurs. This is a graph I took from United. So the forebay is almost completely full. I mean, these guys have really recharged a lot of water. So there's zero lines kind of up there. So the forebay is really, really full of water right now. If you look at the kind of southern portion of the coast here in our favorite management area, you can see that even though the forebay is really, really full, we still have water levels along our saline intrusion management area that are below sea level. And this is part of this is just the natural structural, geology of the basin, such that where the recharge goes in is in the north end. And unfortunately, the saline intrusions occurring in the south end. So can we really bring these basins into sustainability just through recharging in the forebay? I mean, it seems like it would be a pretty difficult task. Okay, going even deeper. So it's generally understood that saline intrusion enters in through the upper aquifer system. So a little bit too much pumping in the Oxnard Plain draws in that seawater into the upper aquifer system. Then it kind of makes its way down into the lower aquifer system. Why this is really challenging is because through our evaluation, through these kind of model scenarios in which we modeled pumping reductions, so you raise up these water levels, right, to kind of get them above those minimum thresholds I mentioned, and you want to push that saline intrusion out of the basin, basically. And what we found is, as you reduce pumping incrementally and raise those water levels, you actually start to spill water out of the upper aquifer system in the model, of course. So keep that in mind. But so you start spilling water out in the upper aquifer system, and then you still have some of that migrated water in the lower aquifer system that's really, really persistent. And it's partially just because of the hydrogeology of the basin, how that water kind of enters in the upper aquifer system. There's some other lessons here. The lower aquifer system is probably more over appropriated than the upper aquifer system is. So if we could shift pumping from the lower to the upper, that might help a little bit. We've done some modeling to kind of show that we can optimize pumping, meaning have less of a reduction if you kind of reduce pumping in some of those critical areas, like closer to the ocean and in the lower aquifer system. So this is a challenging situation to deal with. We have shown, again, through some of our modeling, that with the appropriate optimization of pumping, you can stop that saline intrusion front from coming in, but it's really quite difficult to deal with in the lower aquifer system and to remediate it. So, some old school hydrogeologists will just look at this and say, well, you should pump and treat this, right? That's the only way that you're really gonna solve this problem and remediate it. And so United has some really interesting propositions to basically put a pumping barrier right along the coast, pump that water up, which is basically salt water, and desalinate it. And so that has a lot of potential. We've modeled that, and that was one of the scenarios that actually remediated this issue. Okay, so that's a summary of Oxnard. I just like this image here. This is kind of just showing from 2015 to now where our water levels are in each of those key wells relative to those minimum thresholds. And if this was 1 year earlier, this would not look like this. I mean, in the past, 23 to 24, we've had these just meteoric rises where now in many parts of the basin, water levels are at least above where we thought they would be for this groundwater sustainability plan. But in many cases, they're actually above the minimum thresholds. And the forebay over here on the left side, they're actually even above the measurable objective. So they are really quite healthy right now. All right. We're going to go through the other two basins right now. Pleasant Valley Basin, right next to Oxnard. They're pretty well connected. A lot of nuances to this basin. The kind of southern portion of the basin looks quite similar to Oxnard in the hydrographs. The northern part is a little more complicated. Here are the key wells. These are the wells that we're measuring our progress towards sustainability. And I spared you too much cross sections here, but I did want to show one of the Pleasant Valley. This is in the northern end of the Pleasant Valley. And so you can see it's pretty heavily faulted. There's these kind of compressional forces that cause these anticlines and synclines. And so what you have is these compartmentalized basins. So it's not totally straightforward to manage just in terms of where your monitor well might be on one side of a fault, and then there's something else occurring on the opposite side of that fault. So it's a little bit more nuanced. But the recharge in the Pleasant Valley kind of comes through. This is Arroyo Simi. I think they call it Arroyo Las Posas here. And it turns into Callegas Creek at some point downstream. So a lot of the recharge in Pleasant Valley kind of comes in through this. And this is a really interesting thing that's happened, possibly as a result of imported water in Simi Valley. But those upstream basins like discharged all this poor quality water, is kind of salty water, and it entered the northern part of this basin here. I'll show you some hydrographs and we can talk about that some more, but I just want you to kind of understand that the northern part of Pleasant Valley has a little bit of a different situation than the southern part going on. Okay, a lot more colors here as we have a pretty diverse source of water supplies. Again, blue is pumping, green is imported water, and then yellow, they do get some Santa Clara water deliveries as well from United here. So similar story to Oxnard. Overall water demand has decreased a little bit. Part of that, again, might just be because some of that Santa Clara water hasn't been available as much the past 5-10 years than in history. Of course, the past 2 years, a lot of it was available. So looking at some of these hydrographs for the state of sustainability in Pleasant Valley, this one on the right here, you can see that water levels in Pleasant Valley, as that brackish water entered into the basin, it actually rose up. Unfortunately, this hydrograph doesn't go back in time quite long enough, but maybe around 1995, we just saw those water levels start to rise up with really poor quality water as those kind of downstream discharges entered the basin. People actually like having poor quality water into their basins around here. It's better than no water, right? Because you can desalt it. And so if you notice these minimum thresholds for this hydrograph on the right is really quite low. That's because there's a desalter operating in northern Pleasant Valley that's treating that brackish water. So we try to work with folks within our basin in these sustainability plans. We're not trying to set thresholds to prevent people from operating, but if you have a good project like a desalter or something like that, that's treating some of these sustainability issues. So we set a lower threshold, kind of anticipating that desalter is going to kind of slowly pump down that brackish water and treat it in the northern part of the basin. The southern part of the basin, closer to Oxnard, I guess I should also pause here and just say that we tend to manage Oxnard Pleasant Valley together. We call them OPV. And so we set goals for the southern portion of Pleasant Valley relative to seawater intrusion as well. I mean, we kind of manage these as one basin. You can sort of see, if you look at this hydrograph 34 GO3 on the top left, you can see some influence, like the water levels kind of rose up like they did in the northern part of the basin, but you see the influence of a lot of that pumping as well. And then if we bring another hydrograph in, this one we just looked at, look at the similarities. This hydrograph is from the coast of Oxnard Plain. Look at how similar the water levels are along the coastline, but this far inland into Pleasant Valley. It's almost like they're the same basin, but they're not exactly the same basin, but they are interconnected. So these thresholds on this portion of Pleasant Valley are set with considerations of that seawater intrusion into Oxnard. And it's sort of like when you're in a car and you have, dual climate control. So I have this girlfriend, she's from Arizona and I'm from Wisconsin. So she likes to set hers at 80 in the car and I set mine at 60, right? So what temperature do you think the car is at we sort of have to raise these water levels together to kind of manage sustainability. So a lot of the pumpers in Pleasant Valley really don't want seawater intrusion to be their problem. Of course, they're saying, hey, that's Oxnard's problem. It's not us. You know, we're fine over here. But when you really look at the data, I think we need to manage these collectively. I mean, if we just raise water levels on one side and then Pleasant Valley is still down here, it's going to be quite difficult to accomplish those goals in Oxnard without kind of managing everything collectively. Okay, so Pleasant Valley is in decent shape. Okay, they're pumping, you know, we think around 12,000 acre feet is a sustainable yield, 11, 12,000. Annual production is around 14,000. So, I mean, you're a little bit overdrafted, but it's pretty manageable situation, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 acre feet of overdraft in the long term. So overall, it's not in bad shape, a little bit overdrafted though. Here is the kind of composite look at some of these water levels. Again, really similar to what we've seen in Oxnard. Huge rises in 2023 and 2024 to a point that we're at or above a lot of these minimum thresholds. This is, by the way, from fall, or excuse me, this is spring of 2024. So some of these may be a little higher now than they were when we did this evaluation. Okay, one more. We're almost through this. So here's the monitor plan for Las Posas Basin. There's a big fault kind of in the middle here that separates the two into an east and west. Maybe some communication across the fault, but really there's a huge drop in water levels. So that fault is probably impounding a lot of water. So on West Las Posas, you're connected to Oxnard. On East Las Posas, kind of in your own universe over here. Similar situation to Pleasant Valley, both with the faulting, compartmentalizing flow a little bit, but also this Arroyo Las Posas kind of recharging some somewhat poor quality water in the southern portions of the basin. So a lot less colors here than in Pleasant Valley, pretty heavily dependent on groundwater production, some imported water from Calleguas, which is essential. And this basin did not decrease in demand from historical to present. So actually more production has gone into, in this basin. So water demand has actually increased over the kind of historical to now timeframe. And let's just look at some of these water levels. These are selective, you know, these basins are kind of complicated, but as you can see in the southern portion, similarly to Pleasant Valley, rises in water level, kind of poor quality water. You can see the total dissolved solids in the southern portions of the basin are rising as that kind of recharge makes it through there. The northern part of East Las Posas, really just legacy declines. I mean, this hydrograph goes back to 1974. So a lot of declines in the northern part of the basin, but then as you can see, water levels are rising in the south part. So it's not totally straightforward to manage these basins. I mean, you don't just want to ramp this whole basin down as a part of a water master when there's some areas that may be receiving less recharge, some receiving more. So hopefully we can optimize this basin kind of through our water master duties. Looking in East Las Posas, a lot of differences here. You sort of see more of a signature looking like Oxnard as you go into west, you know, they're closer to Santa Clara River, closer to the forebay. They kind of get a little bit of recharge from that. If you go into west Las Posas, this hydrograph on the right, that's another kind of problem area. As you can see, kind of just some legacy declines, maybe a little reprieve there around 1990s to 2000s. But so you have a couple problem areas in Las Posas, west Las Posas and northeast Las Posas. And so the great thing about this basin is that we have Calleguas around. So we have these incredible resources in these basins. I mean, we have access to imported water. We've got interconnections between waterworks districts and agricultural users. And so we're in a situation here that sure, there are some problems, but I mean, the innovation that we have with folks like Calleguas and the, you know, United, even the city of Oxnard, I mean, we have incredible resources to solve some of these problems. So compared to some other basins, I think we're in really good shape to kind of manage these going forward. I mean, these problems are solvable. Okay, so overall, about 30,000 acre feet is kind of the estimated sustainable yield. Production is a little higher than that, around 35,000 or so. This basin adjudicated in 2023, so the court determined the water rights of the basin at 40,000 acre feet. So which, you know, historic pumping was probably around 40,000. So a little higher than is probably sustainable right off the bat, but not unmanageable. I mean, Oxnard, you're talking about 20,000 acre feet of over appropriation. Pleasant Valley and Las Posas, I mean, you know, 2 to 3 to 5,000 acre feet of over appropriated water. So these problems are really manageable. These are round numbers. Please visit the evaluations for more details. And our composite look at our kind of state of sustainability here, not really looking like the other basins, as you can kind of see. Not all of these arrows are just going up, especially in that kind of north east Las Posas. You can see a couple of arrows are going down there. Again, in that sort of pumping depression area in West Las Posas, you can see one of the arrows is going down there as well. Also, some of these wells haven't been measured, you know, so that's a huge issue. So we'll want to get our hands around that as well. We want to make sure that we get water level measurements. Okay, so I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit, but overall, we're on track to meet our sustainability goals, partially because of a couple of really wet years that helped us get those water level thresholds up above where we are. But we have really great capacity to manage these issues. We've got the water master duties. Oxnard Pleasant Valley may adjudicate as well. So we have tons of administration, tons of really smart, capable agencies around here that can help manage these basins. And so I think part of it is collaborating with these folks. We need to work together to encourage things like recycled water, imported water supplies, connect pipelines. And so we've awarded a lot of grant money. The other thing that I don't think a lot of people talk about is like at an agency like Fox Canyon, we're finally staffed up and we've been critically short staffed for a long time. So we need to retain these staff. I mean, that's critical in continuing to manage these basins. I mean, we can't collaborate with other agencies if we don't have enough staff that have capacity to meet them. So people are really, I think, the critical portion of managing these basins that doesn't really get talked about as much. Also, a lot of grant money helps too, as you can see here. So we've drilled a lot of monitor wells. We've drilled some wells with United along the coast and interconnected some pipelines to help sort of wheel water around in a more effective way. All right, that's all. These evaluations are available on our website. They're also on DWR's website, and there's an open comment period on them as well if you feel like commenting. So that's all. Thank you. I'll take questions if you have any.
I see one question in the chat right now. I think it's a two-parter. Any data on water quality in the lower Santa Clara Basin? Agricultural interests is still pumping in the lower Oxnard Plain. Saltwater intrusion has not eliminated the lower plain as a source of water for agriculture. That was the statement. And then the second part is, has overpumping in the upper watershed had a negative impact on water quality?
In the upper watershed?
Yes, in the upper. Has overpumping in the upper watershed had a negative impact on water quality?
I don't know that much about the upper watershed, to be honest.
Any other questions? Yeah.
You can speak into your mic.
You were mentioning about a desalter unit working with United, but I want to know hydraulically, how's that work? If you're extracting water and desalinating it, you're putting it back in the ground. Is that correct? Or where would that water go?
They're just delivering it to their customers, and then the brackish product gets put into a brine line that goes out to the ocean.
Okay, so no injection back into that.
No. Okay. Not with I think Oxnard has an advanced water purification plant that they're hoping to do something like that. So there's a lot of potential for projects like that.
Thank you.
A small question. I guess I'm curious, like, how climate projections play into this, because, like, say we have another 10 years of drought, like, are we, planning on, like, really wet winters to play into our groundwater sustainability, or how does that, how does that play into this?
That's a good question. So Department of Water Resources has these climate change factors. So when we do our modeling, we incorporate some climate change factors. I could show you maybe if you notice on this hydrograph, some of those DWR factors are that the ocean is predicted to rise a couple of feet. So if you notice this one, almost there. If you notice this minimum threshold, it's at 2 feet above sea level. So we incorporate, there's a 2030 climate change factor and a 2070 climate change factor. So we incorporate predicted drying and rising of sea level in our modeling. It would be ideal if we had more resources and more time to maybe model like a really dry scenario, model an average scenario, and model maybe a more wet scenario, so you can create management criteria for each of those. But right now we just include that kind of DWR climate change factor in our modeling predictions. Thanks.
And then I guess like as a general, are there any specific projects or interests like upcoming that you could see like partners within this committee joining and helping with?
Oh yeah, there's a whole host of projects. I don't want to just list them off of my mind because it would be an incomplete list, but there's a whole host of projects between like ASR with Kyagus, interconnected pipelines with United, this brackish treatment project that United has. The city of Oxnard has some really great recycled water potential. So there's a huge amount of projects so involving Santa Clara water, but also just developing new water supplies, water storage. So there's a huge amount of potential and a bunch of really like innovative people and agencies around here. We don't really get a lot of credit for the level of innovation that I'm seeing around the Oxnard Plain and in Las Posas and Pleasant Valley. But I mean, some of these projects are really incredible, the engineering that goes into them. So there's amazing resources with regard to potential projects to help us solve this. I think the big question kind of comes down to money at the end of it, where you have a project, you can solve a problem. Is the cost worth it versus paying for this project to maybe avoid pumping less? So I think we might be at a point that we almost need some economists to kind of look at, do we want to pump a little bit less? That has a huge cascading effect on an agricultural economy versus pay first projects to bolster water supply. So there's a kind of a cost benefit analysis that needs to be done with some of those.
Awesome. Thank you for that response. I'm just taking a few notes.
Robert, we did get a question. It says, what is the Camarillo Southwest Diversion Study? SW Diversion Study?
Stormwater.
Stormwater.
Clara.
Camarillo Stormwater Diversion Study.
Okay, I'm not really familiar with all the details of all those studies, so I don't want to talk about them too much, but I think there was some studies looking at kind of temporary storage of stormwater coming in and filling up some kind of retention basins that operators could use to irrigate if there's a bunch of really wet water to kind of stop that flash of storm flow from going out to the ocean. So that's about all I really know. So probably, let me look into it and I can let you know.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. The next section of our meeting will be 2 presentations on how there were responses to our red flag warnings this winter and public safety power shutoff events. So the first presentation is from Kyagus Municipal Water District. Omar, if you'd like to come up and we can pull up your presentation. I would like to state that we will have time for open discussion and many questions afterwards. So please stick around and participate in that. Thank you.
present on the PSPS wind events and the recent fires, how they impacted Callegas and how we responded to these events. So under normal operation, Callegas receives its water from Metropolitan Water District, and we have our Lake Bard water filtration plant and our Las Posas well field, which those are offline, and we utilize them when we need to supplement water for any outages. We manage our reservoirs at levels during the winter time to ensure that we're managing water quality and we have that turnover. So they could be at 50%, they could be at 25%. And in cases where you have two reservoirs side by side, you can take one offline. And of course, we operate our distribution system off of Southern California Edison Power. So during this time, Metropolitan did a shutdown on their Foothill feeder. It was scheduled short notice. They found corrosion in their 78-inch water line that feeds their Jensen plant. In preparation for the shutdown, Callegas put the Lake Bard water filtration plant in circulation mode on December 4th and began injecting into the well fields on December 16th. Circulation mode just means that we're conditioning the filters and backwashing those filters and preparing them for the filter runs. And those circulate and they go back into the Lake Bard water filtration plant. I'm sorry, go back into Lake Bard. So available resources during the Metropolitan shutdown, we did have Lake Bard. We have the Las Posas well field, which is, those are our ASR well field. And we did have supplemental water from LADWP at that time. It was a minimal amount of water that we could get from LADWP, but Metropolitan was able to arrange that. And of course, at that time, Metropolitan's Jensen plant went down on January 5th. So we had to make some operation modifications. We had to put the well field in operation to maintain the reliability. Our power demands as we start utilizing more wells. We do have 18 wells that we can run. We don't run them all together. But if you're running your treatment plant, you're running your wells and all your booster stations, you end up with additional power demand. We had to increase our pumping. We want to make sure that our water levels were going to be at a higher level. So as we start seeing a demand from many of our purveyors, we're able to meet that demand and not have any negative impacts to them. And then on the power safety shutoff background, so this is kind of the overall circuits, if you can, on the right-hand side for Southern California Edison. But Southern California Edison, they give us our notifications regarding potential public safety shutoff PSPSs. Initially, we had one circuit that was under consideration. By January 5th, 68 Callegas accounts across 27 circuits were considered for de-energization. Okay, now I'm struggling and I haven't for de-energizing. All right, the first PSPS event that Callegas experienced in January since 2021, right? This has been a new change. We start seeing the winds, but since 2021, we really haven't had any events in the month of January. This is an idea of how Edison's circuits work. So if you look at the areas in red, they're off. And what's interesting is this is why no rhyme or reason how these circuits intertwine, but you can not have any light at your house and your neighbor's lights are on. And this is kind of gives you an idea of why, how they manage those and how they map those out. It's very difficult for us to figure out. Obviously the blue is online, red is off. And then the yellow and then the far right on the orange, those are circuits that are either going to be shut off and they've been notified within hours or, I'm sorry, within minutes or any time. But then the orange is usually like a 6-hour window that they give you. So January 5th, we received our PS events. We know that there was going to be widespread wind and damage, extremely dry vegetation. Nobody could have predicted the catastrophic event, but we were informed that this was coming our way. So at Cayugas, we did some operational planning. We did a roundtable discussion. We started looking at if we do lose power, what's going to happen, right? We had a conventional water filtration plant that's online. You have multiple boosters and pumps throughout the system, as well as our wells. One of our biggest concerns was if we lose power, what happens if our generators don't fire off right away, or if there's a communication problem? So, in coming up with some creative ideas, we tried to figure out, hey, what could we do? And part of it was, why don't we just put our fate in our own hands and get these generators running? The problem with that, oh, sorry, let me go back. So the problem with that is that there's a lot of coordination within staff that you have to pull in and regulatory agencies and trying to figure out what's going to happen. But during that time, when we're looking at how are we going to manage, you can see these are our demands, whether you're a person who likes to have things in million gallons per day or cubic feet per second. But if you look at the increase right around the 5th, that was our demands that we saw just skyrocket. And that's because every purveyor was looking at this saying, start filling our reservoirs, right? So that demand increases. We couldn't afford having our plant shut down, because then those purveyors are immediately impacted as well. And we do operate our reservoirs during the winter time. We keep them at a lower level, so you have that turnover and you don't have stagnant water sitting in your tanks. So as mentioned, we started preparing and how we can come up with different ideas, how we take control ourselves. We reached out to Ventura County APCD and started asking, hey, can we at least turn our generators on before Edison shuts us off? The issue was within their own regulations, that's not declared an emergency yet. You still have power. So we sat down and Amy Mueller, our water quality supervisor, drafted an amazing letter explaining everything associated with our purveyors being out of water, that Cayugas impacts over 600,000 residents within the county through purveyors, and then the impacts that would have on water quality should we lose power and lose pressure. We would have to essentially reach out to Department of Drinking Water and possibly notify people of a boil water alert. So once they saw that, we were able to partner with APCD, and they said, look, okay, here's what you guys can do. You guys can go ahead and start before. We were looking at trying to bank our generator hours for maintenance and say, either way, we're going to ensure that we have this. So what came out of this was interesting, because now Ventura County Air Pollution Control District has sent us an email saying anytime that one of these events comes up, all you have to do is just send us an email. You don't need to wait for the okay. And now they're going to change how they view these PSPS events on their emergency regulations. Go back to that. So if you have generators, I would recommend that you reach out to them. We received the email. I don't know if anybody else has received that correspondence, but it'd be good to receive that and just have something from them saying that during PSPS events, could we operate in that fashion? Okay, so power transition. This is at night. We had to bring different groups in, from the treatment operators to instrumentation technicians to our IT specialists, just at all hands on deck, even though this is not everybody, but just trying to go through the sequencing of how we're going to transition different areas, right? So some of our pumping areas are far away from the treatment plant as well as away from our wells, and trying to stage everybody in different locations, and then transfer that power over and make sure that we are constantly communicating on anything that could be happening, whether there's a fault or anything else. So fortunately, through previous, whether it's board members and management, at least they had the forethought of creating a generator system that keeps our, whether it's our wells or our plant, or even our facilities in power. So those capital investments, that was paramount. It didn't matter how many staff members we had or what kind of planning we did. If we didn't have standby generation power at these facilities, they would have been done. We would not have been able to supply power. So this is our Conejo standby generators. We have 4 2,900 horsepower generators at that location. And that supplies power to the Lake Bard water filtration plant, and then other district facilities like our headquarters and so forth, which are at that same location. It began running on January 7th until the evening of January 16th. We restarted the morning of January 20th, and that we remained on at that time, and that was just because of another PSPS event. Our wellfield standby generator, I know we recently had a tour for our purveyors, but if you ever get a chance and you're able to see that, it is, I am new to Calleguas, and it is beyond impressive. So we have 4 2,900 horsepower generators there, and they supply power to all of our well fields 1 and 2. And I said, as I mentioned, that's the 18 wells that we have. And they ran from the afternoon of January 7th through the morning of January 13th. And this is our Granson pump station. We have 2 3,700 horsepower generators there and 1 750 horsepower. That 750 horsepower is really for house power. It's not, doesn't really run the pumps, and they ran from January 7th through January 11th. Back to that. When we look at how long these generators ran, we calculated that we burned about 80,000 gallons worth of fuel. Not an option, right? We would have been without water, and we were calling every 2 or 3 days, making sure that a delivery was coming. We didn't care if it came on a Saturday, 10 o'clock at night, 10 in the morning, just make sure that we have that fuel available, and we didn't have any issues with that. So we did communicate with our purveyors as some of them were experiencing communication loss. So what we were able to do is those who requested it, we were able to put them on a different delivery system, which is a float system. Instead of through instrumentation, telemetry, and taking in demand, they'd basically be working off the hydraulic levels within our reservoirs and being able to fill them that way. And that would keep them in water instead of them trying to control just the levels in their tanks. And some of them did it, and some of them said, no, we'll keep running until our, any issues with our generators. But it just ensures that you're going to continue to get water as long as we're continuing to pump. So as we know, our big fires were the Hughes fire, the Eaton fire, and the Palisades fire, and everybody had a big focus on that. But from January 7th to January 23, if you look at, these are all the other fires that occurred within the county. And each one of these fires pulled a different level of service and resources that were needed. And at Calleguas, we do support Ventura County Fire. We do have one of these dip tanks right here on the left-hand side where they can come in, draw, and it's not quite completed, but we are working with them to complete this project. After the fires, Calleguas did respond to a request for mutual aid, and this is Altadena. They had a wooden covered reservoir. Actually, they had 2 of them. So they called us through the Cal Warren. We were able to provide that mutual aid. And this is our staff working. What they wanted us to do is, hey, we need to pump out this water to be able to get all the debris and start addressing how they're going to deal with that infrastructure. Our staff went out there with equipment around 3:30, and they got back around 1:10 on January 16th after completing the assignment. So Calleguas is always ready when we can help, and we have the resources, equipment, whatever it is. We are here to help our purveyors, especially during a time of need and emergency. So looking ahead, we know that there's fire-related legislation, and I'm not going to get too much into it. And that has changed the political landscape in Sacramento and DC. And we know that there's going to be big changes and expectations of water systems. Numerous bills addressing prevention and response and recovery. And then we'll continue to track that information as it gets updated. Questions? Yes.
That was really interesting to hear the backup plans, but are the generators at multiple locations, or is it like, because I just think about, oh, great, that's of course going to be the one place that burns down, and then we have no water to fight anything.
Yeah, so we have generators at multiple locations. However, at each location, there's redundant generators, but you're still you're still just supporting that one location. So we also have portable generators that we can pull, and if something were to happen to a generator, right, or that facility, as long as we're able to connect into a panel or anything like that, we do have backup generators that we can pull. The other ones that I showed on the slide, those are all stationary.
I ask because we, on a very tiny scale, and on our farms have generators so we can pump our water during emergency events like that too. And that only works if we can get in, you
Right.
know? And so I was just wondering that one of the things that the ag community has is an ag pass, so you can get into road closures and stuff like that, not during the major event, but you know, in the aftermath to get things up and moving and help mitigate some of the damage. Do you guys work with local law enforcement to ensure that your staff have that?
We do. Whether it's the Office of Emergency Services, we will communicate and identify ourselves. One thing that is being discussed and has been discussed in the industry is that people in utilities are identified as first responders, right? And then when you want to get into one of these locations, which we know that that's happened before, where they're like, hey, you guys can't come in here. But within Callegas, our employees do have their IDs as well that identifies them. And then we have our district vehicles. But we are able to get to those facilities. If there's grave harm or anything like that, obviously they're not going to allow anybody to get in there. You're not going to be able to service the generator that's on fire, but we are able to get to our facilities. Thank you.
I was just curious about the ASR a little bit. So you mentioned that you started recharging, but that was a result of Metropolitan shutting down your intertie with them.
Yes.
So you just basically use the ASR field as a bank while Metropolitan had their pipeline shut down.
Yeah. So whenever Metropolitan schedules a shutdown, we will inject water ahead of time, knowing that based off the calculations of how long they're going to be down and then what that volume is compared to what we're able to produce from Lake Bard. That's how we will offset that. So we pre-pump in, and that's the water we take out. Obviously, there's always a little bit of water left over. We don't try to make it that finite, but yeah.
Thanks, and great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. That was really great. I think the story about APCD giving you guys the approval to move forward with switching to emergency power is such a great story, and really also fantastic that it happened so quickly. I think it was in like 30 minutes or something from the request to the approval, which is unheard of and a really great story. So hopefully we hear more situations like that going forward. The need for emergency fuel is obviously critical. And you had said, 6 days of generator power and needing to have those diesel trucks come. I'm wondering if we have a more wide scale emergency situation, if there's kind of a priority scale determining who gets fuel if there were to be a shortage, if that's a like OES function, or how does that work?
Yeah, it would be at that time, your agency's there to make sure you take care of your agency. And when you can't get fuel or you have those difficulties, you're already going to reach out to OES through our our EOC will reach out and say, here's some of the things that we have happening. And then they'll figure out those resources and where they're going to bring them in from. But it would be a way to work with OES or even Cal Warren at that point and just say, where can we get fuel? Where can we get a truck, to start delivering these things? Yeah, I mean, health and safety is the first thing that they're going to look at, and they will set those priorities. So there are times where you will look at it, and obviously fire is going to be there, and they're going to make sure that they're able to run all of their rigs and make sure that they constantly have their water tenders running and helicopters fueled, which is different levels of fuel. But knowing that if your water system's not running, you're really not going to get water. So there is a balance in understanding that water systems are critical.
It's just, I'm so glad that you guys, I assume that you and your board and everybody are always thinking about the what ifs, the hypotheticals, because, it's so, as a citizen, to see these fires burn, and then when they don't have the water support they need to fight these fires, it's coming up. It seems like it comes up every year that there's some type of water issue that happened and that reservoir wasn't full because it was down, or there wasn't pressure in this line for whatever reason, and so I loved that you were working with other agencies when they're down to make sure that that it's just having that collaboration to make sure that there's nothing that isn't unsupported at a certain time. And I hope that's happening all the time, because it's scary to think that the firefighters come and they can't get water.
Yeah, I think there's been a good job, especially with Ventura County Fire, on explaining to the community how water systems work, and that they're not really designed to put out these, big fires and wilderness fires, and they're really designed for the one resident or a business. And of course, they've been, did a great job about explaining when you have that many trucks pumping off a water system, they're pumping it out faster than you could pump it in some cases. However, when there is a fire and damage, and what happens is the water to your home is going to run. And nobody pays attention to those things as well. The biggest hurdle is making sure that communication's clear. And the biggest hurdle is painting the picture that we need and making sure that people are going to the right resources to get accurate information. So, and Callegas is always here to help in any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will have a little bit of time at the end for any more follow-up questions regarding this general topic. But next, we will have another presentation from United Water and their response and communications during these events. And feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Tony Quinn. I'm the Risk and Safety Manager for United Water Conservation District. So I'm covering a slightly different approach when it comes to the red flag warnings and actual fire responses. So add S at the end, because plural, we were impacted by several fires directly. So we'll cover that. And I will focus more on, how we tackle it from our district perspective. But before I get started, I also want to mention that usually during any PSPS, or we see there's a situation going on, myself and Daniel Cohen from Callegas, we're usually in communication and we're in touch with OES as well too, so that we have the information ahead of time so we can make the proper decision. So as Omar pointed out, the red flag warnings, we get the same red flag warnings. Daniel and I are usually on the OES calls. He's representing, all the water purveyors. And then from our end, if we have any anticipated impact, I would shoot him a text message during the call to share with the group if we need to. So it's good to get a good idea of where the county resources are too ahead of time, so we can plan ahead. We're on the National Weather Service distribution list as well. One thing to note is that, the ones we get internally, right, as a government agency, for the majority, like I'd say 90% of the slides that they share during their briefing calls, they post it on their social media channels too, whether it's on Instagram or X. So highly recommend using those sources as well. I know sometimes during news coverage, like locally, ABC7, they would take screenshots from the NWS briefing. Sometimes they're on those calls too. And then when the county OES does their call, usually there's a National Weather Service rep as well too. So we're getting information from official sources instead of relying on unofficial sources. We do keep track of like some other chatter going on, but overall we do predominantly rely on official sources. And when we get the notification, what we do is we send that out to our operations team, our Lake Piru Park Rangers team, as well as the engineering team, so that everyone's having that common operating picture. And then they, we already have some protocols in place, right? We top off our tanks, make sure the backup generators are ready. We have both portable generators and like fixed generators, so it just depends on the location. For our Lake Piru water treatment plant, we actually have a mobile generator, so we tow it from the maintenance shop all the way to the treatment plant, which is about a mile north off of Piru Canyon Road. So the mountain fire, I'm gonna start off with that one because that one actually impacted us quite a bit. It first started impacting our staff. We have staff that live in Camarillo. So from an employee safety standpoint and welfare, because we want to make sure that they're taken care of at home too, right? And if someone needs to leave, like absolutely, we're in full support of that. So once that kicked off, like we activated our emergency operations center. So we have all the key leadership team involved, as well as the operations team that's on the ground, so that we're all on the same page and that information doesn't get siloed. And one thing we've learned through previous instances is that sometimes each department, they put on their own hat without considering other departments' impact, right? So we want to get all the brain power together so that we have a coordinated response internally. And as Omar shared, there's the OES dashboard. They have the one with the circuits. We look at that as well, but we also look at evac zone boundaries. As you can see from the slide, the picture on the right, that one's pretty close to a Freeman diversion facility, which is right along the Santa Clara River. So there's that, and I'll show some pictures to kind of provide accurate representation of how close the fire was to our facilities. So before I go into that, I do want to point out, we rely on OES's Everbridge system, which publicly is known as VC Alert. They have given us access to their tool and we use that to activate our emergency operations center. So it's a way to see, okay, who's available to respond to this situation. So we'll send it by email and text. If it's a really dire situation, we'll flip on the ability to notify by phone as well. In this situation, since it's during business hours, we just did email and text, and within a couple minutes, I was able to see, all right, who at the district are available to respond. So if someone's traveling, right, we know they're out of pocket. So we go to their alternate persons, like, hey, can you represent your department, right, in our EOC? So there are times where we've done like an in-person EOC, and sometimes we do a hybrid one, or sometimes we just do a completely virtual. So it just depends on case by case. If it's after hours where everyone needs to jump on a call, we'll just do a virtual one. But yeah, it's a fantastic tool that we use to see, okay, who do we have available to respond? It's a quick snapshot. And then going back to sources, VC Emergency was very good. We also rely on watch duty. It became very popular back in early January. And one thing to note is that I saw a picture from the City of Los Angeles Emergency Operations Center, and on one of their giant screens, they have watch duty on, like front and center. And what's great about it is that they're staffed by off-duty dispatchers. So you're getting professionals who are volunteering their own time to share out critical information. So it's a very valuable tool. Several fires ago, we actually made this app available to all district employees. The way it works with United is that, cell phone, we issue district cell phones, but staff can't automatically download, apps that they want, right? So we just made that like started push because like, right, hey, anyone who wants to, stay informed, here's the app to download. And finally, we also relied on social media. X is an example. But with that, there's a caveat, right? There's a double-edged sword when it comes to social media. There's a lot of unconfirmed rumors, and there's also really good real-time information. So the key thing is know the account you're following. So in this case, we follow the VCFD PIO account, right? So that gives us official information, right? Like we can trust that as credible information. And if we needed something in real time, like real time, we have several ways of getting that information, primarily through OES as well too. Or it was like, hey, this fire is getting really close to our facility. That's a call to the ops section at the EOC, right? Or duty officer, depending on what their staffing status is at the time. But yeah, this is what we rely on in terms of official, real official sources for situation awareness. Because sometimes it'll take a while before VC Star publish the update. So to get this in real time helps a lot. Mountain fire. So this is the Freeman diversion. And you can see the one on the right is from our security camera. Those are spot fires that we're getting over a multiple day period. So with the mountain fire, it came within a couple hundred yards away from the Freeman diversion. So that afternoon when the fire, like on the same day as the fire, CAL FIRE and VCFD actually showed up to our facility, and it's not their first time. So our staff are, hey, we're gonna help, make sure they have all the necessary access they need. And we actually had one staff member stayed overnight working the graveyard shift to ensure, just one night, but to ensure that they have all the, they know where everything's at. Because sometimes, especially with CAL FIRE, you're getting firefighters who are from outside the jurisdiction. So we want to make sure that they know where everything is at. As well as, hey, here's a key phone number to call us, right? If there's any issues on site. So we also have a staff that live on site at our Satakoy facility. So if you've ever been to our Satakoy location, right on the south, actually on the west side of the shop, there's actually a district housing there. So we do have an operations staff that lives on site as well. So that helps with the coordination effort. And then, we've taken all the information we get and we put that out in a situation status report to our EOC. And then, at a higher level, our general manager, with his discretion, sometimes he'll forward this over to, our board of directors, right? So they'll get inquiries from the community as well. So it gives everyone just a quick snapshot. Hey, here's what we know at this time. Here's the impact to the staff. Here's the impact to the facility. Here's the impact to the operation. So we kind of give a quick snapshot, bullet point style. So it's quick and easy to reference. And we include pictures as well too. Sometimes to just provide a snapshot of, hey, here's what it's looking like on the ground. This is from the day that the fire started, both pictures actually. And this is where you see, CAL FIRE resources at our Satakoy facility right there. And then that night, some helicopters actually came by. We had some water at our desalting basin on our Satakoy facility. And a fire helicopter actually came by. So between our desalting basin, PTP reservoir, Lake Piru, the lake itself, oftentimes we actually, provide access to the fire department. And they know, this is we have water sources for them to use during actual fires. We actually have an MOU with both Ventura County Fire Department as well as LA County Fire Department. When they, if there's a major fire, they'll come to Lake Piru and they'll scoop up the water and use that to fight the fires. And I'll cover the Felicia fire in a bit as well too, because that was actually right above our dam, and they definitely used the water there to fight fires. So here's another picture of the mountain fire. This was I believe 5 days in. Where our Santa Clara diversion Freeman diversion is actually pretty much adjacent to the Todd Road Jail. So firefighting resources were pre-positioned there for essentially a week. And then the Felicia fire, this occurred back in October. So I'm kind of going out of order in terms of chronologically going backwards, but Felicia fire actually started at the top of the dam. Let me see if the picture works, like right there. Actually, like right there, that's where it started, but it quickly spread to Lake Piru as well too. So it turned out to be, I think the final count was 350 acres of fire, but massive response from multiple agencies, including the U.S. Forest Service as well too. But yeah, the Felicia fire, we had inkling something was going on, but when it actually happened directly on our site, that really kicked things into gear. And then here's a video of how close the fire was. So this is at Lake Piru Recreation Area. You can see we have a lot of water there, but there's a fire right next to it. And then you'll see probably in a couple of seconds how close the fire came to our water tank at Lake Piru. So that's our water tank up there. Let's say the firefighters did a great job in protecting our facilities and our infrastructure. And the individual you see right there is Greg Desjarnet. He's our dam operator. In a previous life, he was also a firefighter. So having him on staff was very valuable has been very valuable to our entire organization. Some of the best practice we learned from the Felicia fire, which actually helped us out in our response to the mountain fire. One was radio communications. Our district, we joined the Ventura County Regional Radio Project. So we were able to hear in real time what was going on the firefighting side. At the same time, we were able to communicate internally very quickly. The way it works in Piru is that only AT&T works. Well, what happened during the fire was their backup power didn't kick in for a couple of hours. And their tower, their AT&T tower in Piru is right next to a water treatment plant, but they're not connected to our emergency generator. They have their own generator. So with cell service being down, the radios were pretty important right away in terms of assessing what was going on the ground. So from an operation standpoint, we knew that, okay, our dam staff they're safe. Now the ranger side, we also had guests at Lake Piru, right? So being able to communicate in real time with them was very critical. And we also had the fact that the fire department was rolling straight to the lake, right? So our rangers team can listen to radio traffic on the fire station channel, but also communicate back to us. Well, what happened was that by having access to the fire department channel, we realized, hey, you know what? The fire department's actually looking for a park ranger, and our park rangers haven't been listening to the radio traffic. So our team quickly met up with them, put together an evac plan for guests that were still on site, right? So having that ability to communicate and actually identify, hey, who we need to get together with right away, that was very critical. And then from my end, I became the acting PIO, I guess, for this incident. So same time, we were getting inquiries from VC Star, right? So being able to listen to the fire traffic, listen to our internal radio traffic, and be able to respond quickly but also accurately to media inquiries, that was huge from our end too. So the emergency comms, we have nothing but very good things to say about it. It's been a great investment on our end. And during the Felicia fire, what we learned was hey, our internet went down at the facility. So what we did afterwards was we're like, hey, you know what? Let's finally start get our own Starlink. So now our radios are connected to Starlink now too. So it's like a tertiary backup, right? So these are public safety radios. So, you know, if the radio system goes down, that means the sheriff's department and the fire department, their radios go down too. So county IT manages all of that. So from our perspective, you know, it becomes a critical area for them to respond to. So that takes us out of maintaining our own radio infrastructure. So yeah, that was huge. And then the picture on the left, I mean on the right and the bottom, there are also more snapshots from the Felicia fire. And you can see from the top right, you see a helicopter drafting water directly from Lake Piru. You know, all the fire departments, they know that, hey, if you're getting water from Lake Piru, you know, we also have, you know, a quagga issue, and they're aware of that, and they know the decontamination protocol that goes with it. But yeah, the Lake Piru has been used so many times to fight fires. I think during the Felicia fire, even Orange County sent their aviation assets to fight this fire. So it was pretty impressive response. And then sometimes, you know, they'll draft water out of Castaic Lake as well too. It just depends on what's available, and there's, you know, air traffic. You know, in our case, right, if a super scooper is coming to Lake Piru to draft water to fight fires locally, you know, our rangers team get the notification pretty quick. But one thing that, you know, a lot of people don't realize is that the rangers team, especially if it's during the summer, they have to go on the lake and in the waters to get the boaters out of the way of the firefighting region. Otherwise, they'll have to circle back, right? They can't make that descent into, you know, basically grab the water. So there's a lot of coordination that goes on behind the scenes in terms of providing resources, you know, to the fire departments. And with that, open up to questions. No problem.
Thank you for that presentation. I would love to also invite Steve Cole up. So the next section is pretty open. I have some questions to address. Hopefully, like Tony, Steve, maybe even Sarah, and Omar. Anyone can feel free to answer some of the questions. And yeah, feel free to start however you'd like, Steve.
Yeah, great. I just want to start off by thanking Omar and Tony, right? I mean, they really showed kind of the nuts and bolts of response to these fires that we've all been experiencing in Southern California. So, I mean, you can tell from their presentations, these are two very prepared organizations to deal with this type of emergency. Our agency, Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency, is kind of up the river from here. We obviously had the Hughes fire that had some pretty scary things that happened with it, but we luckily came through it with not having any damage to our facilities. So very fortunate for that. I'm going to just do a little bit of a wrap up, as Lauren said, and then hopefully be able to field additional questions with Tony and Omar's help. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the policy aspects of how water agencies prepare themselves to manage for wildfire. When you think about how water systems are designed, that's really the first step, right? You have standards that water systems have to be designed to. Part of the challenge is those standards evolve over time, right? Every time you have one of these events, it's like, oh, do you have enough storage? Should you have more, capability to move water around? So these standards consistently evolve. Typically, the way that happens in a water agency, say, as you're building infrastructure, you will have to submit your plans to the county fire marshal, and they review those for firefighting capability. Specifically, as mentioned earlier, generally the focus of those standards and regulations have been to fight kind of single structure fires. And so that's how the water systems are designed to accommodate that. So you take that feedback, you design your plans. The next step is you actually go out and construct that infrastructure, make sure it's constructed in a way that complies with those standards and the plans. And then from that standpoint, going forward, it really involves, how you maintain that infrastructure over time. And we've all heard the stories through these events of reservoirs not being online, right? As an example. And that's a real thing. Our agency in the Hughes fire, we had a significant reservoir offline for maintenance. And that is a normal activity that has to happen for water agencies to make sure their infrastructure is maintained in a way that it's available for the future. So in this case, it's a steel tank. You've got to take the reservoir out of service to recoat it. And we all do that during the winter because there's less demands. Usually it's wet by then. This year, a big exception to that, right? We didn't have any rain in Southern California. I mean, barely measurable rain before these wind events came in. So, as part of our planning now, we're like, well, another step in that process of taking a reservoir offline is going to need to be, what is the conditions this year in January, for example, before we do that. So just a nuance to that, the maintenance aspect of these water systems. Generally, you'll have multiple reservoirs in a zone that's designed that way for a reason. So you have redundancy and you can take one offline and you maintain it. But when you're doing that, your supply is reduced in that specific area. So just another kind of nuance to the things that water agencies deal with. So that's maintenance side. Then it comes down to operations side, right? How you are actually operating the water system during these types of events. I think you heard some perfect examples of, one of the best practices to pre-fill all the water tanks during these wind events so that you are at least at maximum capacity when you enter the event so that you can hopefully withstand power safety shutoffs. You have that capacity there that is dealt with. But as was exampled here, for regional systems, that puts a big load and it comes on very quickly. And then, this idea of regional water agencies and then maybe water districts and then water mutuals, right? There's a lot of different capability depending on which kind of water agency is serving a certain area. And so I think that's something that we're all going to continue to learn at fighting some of these fires. Some just don't have the capabilities as much as others. And that's just how that works. So the last thing I'll just talk about is just kind of the general preparedness of water agencies. That's where you're coordinating ahead of these events with first responders, fire department, having them understand your system, where the vulnerabilities may or may not be. Do you have reservoirs offline? Those types of things so that they understand when they go out to fight a fire that there may be some limitations to those capabilities. So that's kind of the hierarchy of flow through, kind of all the way through the standards, the design of it, the maintenance, the operations, and then ultimately just kind of the preparedness that we all try to manage in our agencies. I think what you're going to see, and you're already seeing it, is when we go through these types of events, everybody tries to learn from it. And there are proposed changes to the way that we deal with some of these things. And so there's already examples of several bills that are going to work their way through the legislature this year. One locally here is Assembly Bill 367. That's sponsored by Assemblymember Bennett and Irwin. It's really designed to get after this emergency backup power aspect. Again, all agencies don't have the same capabilities in that realm. You've heard from Callegas about the significant investment that they've put in for backup generation at their sites. And what we're seeing is that's absolutely critical because the power companies come through now and they turn off the power. And so the water agencies to move water need power. And so this bill is designed in part to require water agencies to have that backup generation, regardless of agency size or capability. So that's kind of one aspect of that bill that is coming forward. There's a requirement in that bill also for the fire department to inspect water systems. And then there's some additional reporting requirements, and then there's a requirement on kind of this idea of pre-fill, of filling up the reservoirs, making that a law to do that. Right now, it's just kind of a best practice that water agencies employ. Another bill is Assembly Bill 1075. That was by a couple Assembly members down in the Los Angeles area. One thing that we saw, and we saw it big time in the Hughes fire, is response by private firefighting, contracted firefighters. And in many cases, this are insurance companies that have funded protection of their basically investment, their insuring of property. And we're starting to see that a lot. In the Hughes fire, for example, the fire was on the east side of the 5 freeway, burning to the west. We saw these firefighters, private firefighting companies, deployed on the west side of the freeway. And they were out there, no structure fires, no fire, but they were pre-watering, and they had 10 hydrants full bore in the water system for a pre-water event. So when you put that kind of demand on a water system, it can drain it really quickly. And so we started seeing our tanks go the wrong direction before a fire was even in the immediate threat of that community. And so if the fire department were to show up, there was going to be limited resources to fight structure fires at that time. So our crews had to kind of play this weird role of policing of the water system. They had to disconnect these crews from those things. So there's a bill now in the legislature that's trying to deal with this. So it's another example. It's kind of a very specific thing, but having the authority to make sure that you can fine or hold these private companies accountable for connecting to a public water system. So another example. Several examples on the bills starting to work their way through on emergency generation. The example Cayugas gave of working with the Air Pollution Control District, that's very encouraging to hear that. I think you're going to see more of that. With the power safety shutoffs, we have to have backup generation and have to be able to use it. So we'll be seeing some bills around that too. I think I'll stop there and just want to make sure we have time for questions, and we can do that. I don't know if Omar and Tony, you want to come back up and we can kind of just walk through and answer those as they come up.
Yeah, it's more of a comment, but the pre-watering thing kind of brought to mind from a farming perspective. We always, when we know a fire event is coming, we're always fighting to get water on in that 2 to 3 days before, because we know our trees will survive better if they have water. And additionally, it's a lot of times the farms that create a buffer to the cities and keep some of those places safe. So just something to think about. A lot of times we have our own water sources, so we're not pulling from maybe a general bigger reservoir or something like that, but some cases we are. And so maybe coordinating that more or planning for that more, I think would be useful.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that with me. I think we all have that feeling, like if we know a fire's coming, right? Our own homes, for example, it's like it's becoming a lot more, people are seeing, reports and things of people that have pre-watered, right? And it maybe has saved a structure or a home, or in the example of the farm. So it is something we're going to have to, I think, work together to coordinate. If you're doing it in the ramp up, it potentially doesn't impact the supplies as long as there's time to replenish those. And so, yeah, it is something that would be interesting to try and coordinate. And if you're on your own well, for example, it's a different situation, right? And so there's a lot of nuance to that as well. I don't know if you guys want to answer any of that.
Good presentations today. Are you guys looking at increasing the flow rate from your supplies into your tanks to have them have the ability to take a higher flow of water in, closer to the exit rate of the water going out versus the input?
Yeah, I think that's really difficult. I'll let each of them talk as well. The water systems are designed, right? And so to do it now is really expensive. You talk about bigger pipes, bigger pump stations, bigger tanks. I think what you'll see as a result of some of these things, some of that will start working its way into the code. And so things that are either built new will be to a different standard that potentially has additional capacity. And things that are replaced, that's generally how you'll have to replace it to those new standards. But it is a really difficult thing to you just don't flip a switch. It's into the design. I don't know if you want to answer any of those.
Yeah, even if you had the ability to put in a larger pipe, I don't know that that would be the best route to go, because when there's no demand, that means that water in that pipe's going to have a longer life and it won't have turnover. It may be beneficial to add additional tank or storage, but when you start increasing the capacity of a water line, when that demand isn't there, you do now create a different problem associated with water quality.
Yeah, pretty much the same sentiment on United's end too. One thing to keep in note is that, the water we have available to fight fires, they're primary, reservoirs or, basins or ponds. So it's slightly different than, with Calleguas, right? With the partnership you have with Ventura County Fire Department.
And also to note, since we're a purveyor, we don't have small water lines. We range from 78-inch all the way down. So a little bit different for Calleguas.
I guess you kind of have like mentioned it already, but are there any other vulnerabilities that have been identified, like in the most recent years? Obviously, we've talked about like starting generators before emergencies and now like addressing the flow. But yeah, any other vulnerabilities that like are on the mind?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it goes back to the emergency generation and some of the regulatory requirements that have been overlaid, and it makes it complicated, right? You would like to think common sense prevails in these situations, and it sounds like it has at Ventura County Air Pollution Control District, which was really cool to hear. I think you're going to see some changes in the legislature that tries to employ some of that common sense, where these facilities, these emergency response facilities for water will be, treated much like first responders for fire department or police. One of the other things that the state has pushed is conversion of our crew fleets to electric vehicle or alternative fuel source. And that is working itself through the process as well. And I think you're going to see a big push from the water agency community about trying to alleviate that. For a fire truck, they don't have those requirements, or police, they don't have those requirements. But the water community, power is another example where they're trying to push to full electric or alternative fuels. And that just doesn't work for the big trucks right now. They're not really out there. And you think about trying to roll a generator around some of these generators are really big and you need big vehicles to do that. As we walk up to these fire events, they turn off the power, so you can't charge the vehicles. And so, yeah, I think logic has a chance of prevailing because of some of these emergencies that unfortunately have happened recently. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
There's a question in the chat we're trying to interpret, but I think it has to do with like imported water and if like there's any relationship with imported water and dealing with these things like and changing like the infrastructure. Interpret as you will.
For our agency, and then the others can talk, we are a state water contractor, so we have state water project supplies that come down, through the Delta, from Orville through the Delta, all the way Pyramid, Castaic Lake, and then we treat that water and serve it. We also have local groundwater resources as well. And so I think, it depends on which agencies and how their supply resources are built. For us, we're able to lean kind of on either of those resources. Yeah, I think some of the things during the firefighting, events got conflated with imported supplies not being available for firefighting. I think those are two different kind of policy questions. There's challenges on importation of water through the state water project. There has been. Do those equate to the capability to fight fires? I don't think so. That's more of a local kind of how the system's performing at that specific time issue. I don't know if anybody else wants to answer that one.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that. I think there was some interest. I guess just one of my last questions is like, how do you deal with water contamination, or like, is there concern with water contamination like after fires, and are there any like preventative techniques for dealing with that?
Just having the water background, yes, there are, and it's usually associated with benzene, and that comes from anything within a household that gets pulled back into the water system. So there are concerns. Usually when there's continuous pressure, there isn't that concern. Then after the fire, you will have to do your analysis, your water quality analysis, and that's usually when Department of Drinking Water, Division of Drinking Water gets involved, and we start notifying to our customers. So Cayugas did provide some help in that area to one of our purveyors. We ended up helping them with a flushing and sampling plan, and we put up a watering station to help their customers come in and be able to fill water while they were dealing with that process. So it does occur. I wouldn't say on every occasion that there's a fire that happens, but yes.
Oh,
I mean, on our end, the water that's being used to support firefighting efforts, the majority of them, they're like, at Lake Pirate, right? So like they're not used for drinking water. It's not touching the OH system that we have El Rio. So usually, firefighting resources, they're not tapping into the water at, say, the Clearwell ponds at the El Rio treatment facility. Whereas, they're grabbing water from the desilting basin. That's usually not a water quality concern from our standpoint.
I'll just add one kind of unique thing that's happened right now because of the Palisades fire. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power have put together a kind of status update of the water quality challenges that these fires bring on. And so they have obviously systems that are offline. So if you go on their website, you can actually see kind of in real time how they're returning and dealing with these water quality challenges in kind of like real time right now is neighborhood by neighborhood. They're restoring service to the community. So it's kind of a unique resource that I hadn't seen before.
So you, for United Water, you kind of spoke on, taking water from Lake Piru and the quagga mussels and kind of the protocols that are taken to protect certain biological impacts. Can you kind of speak more to that in terms of like, obviously a lot of these were structure fires that happened in the Palisades, but some of them are more wildfires. Can you speak to like what that means for like taking the water from this one area and putting certain biological species into another?
Yeah, I mean, that's a risk that we let the fire department know about it. And, it's one of those situations where I think the fire department, depending on which agency, they have their priority in terms of like which water to take, right? Like, for example, the Palisades fire, they didn't want to touch the water in the Pacific Ocean, right? So they want to use fresh water instead, right? Like there are trade-offs to consider. On the Quagga side, I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of our environmental service team, but they have an entire protocol on like, okay, here's what you need to do as an agency. If you're using this water, your equipment touches this water, then you got to follow these protocols. And those protocols are reviewed by our environmental regulators too. So it's been vetted quite a bit. So.
We also have that relationship with County Fire, LA Fire, and they notify us where those units have been and what their decontamination process has been or how long they've been sitting, so that we're aware what other resources they've dipped into. And they do a great job of keeping us in the loop. And also when they can, they'll let us know that they're going to use our lake ahead of time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of those questions. I think some of my last ones are mostly comments. I have the Ventura County Resource Conservation District is a part of the Ventura County Wildfire Collaborative, and we're writing a regional, not we, Raincon Consultants is helping us write a regional prioritization plan on wildfire resilience for the county. And we are forming an advisory committee, and so we would love to have representation from like our water district. So if you have anyone to send to us, or like we can meet separately outside of the advisory committee, I just wanted to put that on your radar since you're here. And thank you so much for joining us today. You can sit down. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm Heidi. I'm one of the co-coordinators for this watershed committee. And we just wanted to provide some updates and a couple closing remarks. The first thing I want to address is our funding partners. We have around 12 funding partners, and invoices went out in October, and I was just going through our recent accounting, and we've gotten checks from most funders, or at least like some communication from funders to like work out if we need MOUs or anything. And I really want to say thank you to every organization who helps support these meetings. When we took over this group and started coordinating for it in summer of 2023, we really weren't sure if like funders would even keep paying. Like they don't know who we are, like we're new to the group. And we've been very happy with the support everyone's given us so far to continue holding these meetings and like just initiate other planning efforts. The first year that we've been working on this committee, there's a lot of back end stuff with taking like the data and the website and the meeting recordings and everything from County Public Works and just kind of like transferring over to our server. So that was like a big back end thing. And this year with coordinating the group, we've kind of been able to shift focus once that was all taken care of to think about how do we want to be organized so that we are competitive for planning grants in the future, to help address some of these problems that we see and like keep our watershed healthy. And we had a meeting, or we discussed it at our November meeting, and Lauren and I went back and kind of looked at different avenues, and we think we're gonna be going towards formalizing a charter with the group and with the funding partners, trying to get MOUs in place, just so we have some consistency, like when people change over and new accountants come in and stuff, people are like, what, what is this funding? What does this do? So just trying to kind of put that stuff down on paper and make it so everyone understands the structure better. And we have Sarah here from the city of Ventura. She's been one of the people we worked with on getting like a test MOU set up in place. And we will be having a meeting with the funders of this group. We'll be reaching out to you all separately just to kind of come up with what that charter should look like. We have some potential drafts we can talk about. And Lauren, do you want to talk about the next part? You want to talk about it down there?
Yeah, so just to close our meeting, I will be sending out a follow-up email, and there's a few surveys that I'll be sending out. You don't have to fill them out, but it would be greatly appreciated if you did. One is from a PhD candidate from the University of Irvine, and they have a survey about understanding California's water challenges. I also think that I will be taking some of their responses and like compiling it for our resources as well. And I'm helping the California Association of RCDs to compile information on post-fire recovery needs in Southern California. For them, it mostly has to do with like reforestation and restoration efforts, but as much information as I can compile would be helpful. And lastly, we have our general interest form and feedback form that will be open to fill out at any time throughout the year. And so if you guys have like versions of this meeting that you want to present at, it can also be a placeholder for any type of planning meetings that you would want. So look out for all of those links and a summary of this meeting. So thank you for coming so much.